The weight of the silver tray was a familiar ache in her wrist. Lena moved through the glittering ballroom, a ghost in a black uniform, her presence essential but unseen. Around her, a sea of silk and diamonds swelled and broke in waves of polite laughter. She offered glasses of champagne with a practiced, steady hand, her smile a small, perfect curve that promised nothing and asked for nothing in return. It was a shield. Tonight's event was for a new tech merger, but the real power in the room wasn't on the stage. It was in the corners, in the quiet conversations held over tumblers of amber liquid. And the absolute center of that power, the still point around which the entire evening spun, had just walked in. She knew of him, of course. Everyone did. Kwon Jin-woo. His legitimate businesses were vast, but the whispers that trailed him were of a different empire, one built of steel, shadow, and blood. He moved like a man who owned not just the room, but the very air within it. His suit was Tom Ford, a shade of charcoal so dark it was almost black, tailored with surgical precision. He didn't walk, he flowed, parting the crowd without a single touch. A flock of models, impossibly tall and draped in gowns that cost more than Lena's car, descended upon him. They smiled, they tilted their heads, they offered their perfect, hungry faces to him like flowers to the sun. He looked through them. His gaze was flat, his expression carved from stone. He gave a curt nod to his host and continued his path, leaving a wake of disappointed pouts and frustrated sighs. Lena kept to her duties, refilling her tray from the service bar, her focus on the delicate balance of crystal flutes. She felt his approach before she saw it, a sudden drop in the ambient temperature of the room, a hush in the noise. He was heading for the secluded terrace, and her path inadvertently intersected his. She paused, holding the tray close, giving him space to pass. He was taller than she'd expected, his shoulders broad under the expensive wool. The scent of him hit her, not a cloying cologne, but something clean and sharp, like cedar and cold smoke. As he drew level, his eyes, which had dismissed a room full of beauties, finally landed on something. On her. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. His eyes were a deep, starless brown, and for the first time that night, they weren't empty. They were assessing, sharp, and unnervingly focused. Reflex took over. Lena offered him the same small, professional smile she offered everyone. It was polite. It was distant. It was safe. But he froze. For one long, silent second, Kwon Jin-woo, the man who moved through the world as if it were an inconvenience, simply stood there, watching her. It wasn't a leer. It wasn't predatory. It was something else, something she couldn't name. It was like a man dying of thirst seeing a glass of water. Then the moment shattered. He gave a barely perceptible nod, a flicker of acknowledgement, and continued onto the terrace, his guards closing ranks behind him. Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She told herself it was nothing, a trick of the light. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being truly seen. Later, the crowd began to thin. Lena was sent to clear the glasses from the terrace. It was empty now, save for the lingering scent of smoke and the chill of the night air. She worked quickly, her movements efficient. As she reached for the last 2 glasses on a small table near the balustrade, she heard voices from the service alley just below. Low. Tense. You were given a deadline, Vasily. The voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried a chilling authority that made the fine hairs on Lena's arm stand up. It was Kwon Jin-woo. There were complications, another voice answered, this one with a thick, Eastern European accent, laced with a desperate bravado. The shipment was misplaced. Misplaced, Jin-woo repeated. The word was not a question. It was a judgment. You mistake me for a patient man. That cargo represents a significant investment. My partners are not the forgiving type. I will find it, Vasily insisted, his voice rising. A few more days. There was a soft click. A sound so small it was almost lost to the city noise, but Lena knew it. The sound of a gun's safety being disengaged. You will return what you took by sunrise tomorrow. Jinwoo said, his voice dropping to a silken whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. Or I will take far more than was ever yours. I will start with your daughter. I hear she has her mother's eyes. It would be a shame to close them permanently. Lena's breath hitched. A glass slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the stone tiles with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Below, the voices stopped. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to become invisible. But she was frozen, pinned by the sudden, absolute certainty that she had just signed her own death warrant. Footsteps, sharp and quick, ascended the metal stairs of the service exit. He appeared at the terrace door, a silhouette against the ballroom lights. He was alone. His eyes found her instantly, sweeping over her frozen form, the shattered glass at her feet. The mask was gone. The bored businessman had vanished, replaced by something ancient and predatory. He walked toward her, his steps measured and silent. He stopped just a few feet away, his gaze locking onto hers. He wasn't angry. He was something far worse. He was calm. You heard that, he stated. It wasn't a question. Lena couldn't speak. She could only nod, a tiny, jerky movement of her head. He studied her face, his eyes searching for what? Fear? Deceit? He tilted his head slightly. You smiled at me earlier. The randomness of the statement threw her. I was working. No, he said, his voice soft. The other smiled at me. You smiled. There is a difference. He took another step closer. And now you're a problem. A loose end. Lena finally found her voice, a thready whisper. I won't say anything. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. A flicker of something amusement? Regret? Crossed his face. I believe you. But the men I deal with do not trade in belief. They trade in certainty. He reached out, not to touch her, but to brush a stray shard of glass from the sleeve of her uniform. The gesture was so unexpectedly gentle it made her flinch. Which is why you're coming with me. His men appeared at the doorway, as silent and sudden as he was. They didn't grab her. They simply stood, their presence a wall she could never hope to break through. There was no choice. Her ordinary world, with its aching wrists and polite smiles, had just ended. The penthouse was a cage of glass and steel overlooking a city that now felt 1,000,000 miles away. It was beautiful, minimalist, and utterly devoid of warmth. For 2 days, Lena existed in it. She was not a prisoner in a cell, but she was a captive nonetheless. She had a bedroom with a silk duvet and a bathroom larger than her entire apartment, but the doors were always watched. Jinwoo was a ghost in his own home. He was there, then he was gone, moving in and out with his retinue of silent, dark-suited men. He didn't speak to her beyond the initial, clinical explanation. You are a witness. A liability. Until my business with Vasily is concluded, you will remain here. You will be safe. Do not try to leave. Lena didn't. She was a survivor. She knew when to fight and when to wait. So she waited. She watched him when he thought she wasn't looking. She saw the immense pressure he carried in the set of his shoulders, the way he would stand for hours staring out at the city lights, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. He was a man holding an empire together with sheer, brutal force of will. On the third night, she was woken by a sound, a choked cry from the main living area. Slipping out of bed, she crept toward the sliver of light coming from under her door. She peered into the vast, moonlit space. Jinwoo was on the sofa, asleep. But it wasn't a peaceful sleep. His head thrashed against the leather cushions, a sheen of sweat on his brow. He was caught in a nightmare. Sohyun, he murmured, the name a raw wound in the silence. Sohyun, I'm sorry. His hand clenched into a fist, his knuckles white. The control he projected at all times had fractured, and in its place was a raw, unfiltered agony. Lena watched, her own breath caught in her throat. This was his vulnerability. This was the crack in the marble. As if sensing her presence, his eyes snapped open. They were wild for a second, lost in the dream's wreckage, before they focused on her. The pain vanished, instantly shuddered behind a wall of cold fury. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice rough. "I heard you," she said softly, not moving from the doorway. He sat up, running a hand over his face, his composure reasserting itself with terrifying speed. "Go back to bed." Lena hesitated. "Who is Sohyun?" The air crackled. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. "That is not your concern." "You loved her," Lena stated, the words leaving her before she could stop them. It wasn't a question. She had heard it in the way he'd said the name. He stood up, turning his back to her to face the wall of glass. "Love is a liability in my world. A weakness enemies can exploit. I learned that lesson a long time ago." His voice was flat, devoid of the emotion she'd just witnessed. "She died because of me. Because of what I am. That is all you need to know." He didn't turn back around, a silent dismissal. Lena retreated to her room, but not before she saw his reflection in the glass. The mask was back in place, but she had seen the man beneath. Broken. Haunted. The next day, the atmosphere in the penthouse was electric with tension. Men moved with a new urgency. Jinwoo was on the phone, his Korean rapid and sharp. Lena couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. A war was coming. Late in the afternoon, he returned from a meeting. There was a fresh, deep gash on the back of his left hand, bleeding sluggishly onto the cuff of his pristine white shirt. He ignored it, heading straight for his desk and a stack of papers. Lena watched him for a moment from the kitchen doorway. She saw the slight tremor in his hand as he tried to work, the way he favored it. Without thinking, she went to the cavernous bathroom, found a first aid kit, and walked back into the living room. She stopped in front of his desk. He looked up, his eyes dark and impatient. "What?" She said nothing, simply placed the kit on the polished wood and opened it. She took out an antiseptic wipe and a bandage. "I don't need," he started. "You're bleeding on your paperwork," she cut in, her voice calm and steady. "And you'll get it infected." She held out her hand. "Give it to me." For a long moment, he just stared at her, a strange expression on his face. It was a look of profound surprise, as if no one had dared to give him an order in a decade. Slowly, as if testing her resolve, he extended his injured hand. She took it. His skin was warm, his hand large and calloused. She worked with a quiet efficiency, her touch gentle but firm as she cleaned the wound. The world seemed to shrink to the space between them. The scent of him, cedar and smoke, mingled with the sharp smell of the antiseptic. She could feel the steady, powerful thrum of his pulse beneath her fingers. He watched her face, his gaze intense. He wasn't looking at her as a liability anymore. He was looking at her, at the focused frown on her brow, the competence in her hands. "You're not afraid of me," he said, his voice a low murmur. Lena didn't look up from her task. "I'm not stupid. I know I should be." She carefully wrapped the bandage around his hand. "But fear is a luxury. I learned that a long time ago, too." She finished, her fingers lingering for a fraction of a second on his wrist. When she finally met his eyes, the air was thick with something new. It wasn't just tension. It was a current, a live wire connecting them. He didn't pull his hand away. Instead, his fingers curled slightly, almost brushing against hers. "Lena," he said. He said her name differently than anyone else ever had. It wasn't just a sound. It was a statement. It was a claim. In that moment, surrounded by the cold luxury of his cage, Lena felt a terrifying, undeniable pull toward the man who held her captive. She had a choice to run when the chaos started. She had chosen to stay, to walk toward him, to touch his wound. And she knew, with a sinking certainty, that she couldn't go back. The silent war between them shifted after that night. The charged moments began to accumulate, small sparks in the suffocating tension of the penthouse. He would find her reading in the living room and dismiss his guards, sitting in silence across from her, the quiet of form of communication more intimate than words. She caught him watching her, his expression unreadable but intense, and she didn't look away. One afternoon, looking for something to break the monotony, she wandered into his home office. He had told her it was off limits, but the door was ajar. It was as Spartan as the rest of the apartment, dominated by a massive mahogany desk. A file lay open on its surface. Her curiosity got the better of her. She picked it up. It wasn't business contracts or financial reports. It was a collection of photographs and profiles. Men's faces, their routines, their families. Beside each was a series of handwritten notes in Korean, but the dates and sums of money were universal. It was a ledger of violence, a list of lives he controlled or had ended. The cold, methodical nature of it made her stomach clench. This was the reality of his empire. Not just threats whispered in alleys, but calculated, brutal enforcement. This was the man whose hand she had bandaged. This was what she should be running from. She put the file down, her hands shaking slightly. She backed out of the room, her heart pounding. She wasn't naive. She knew who he was. But seeing the proof, the cold architecture of his power, was different. It should have terrified her. Strangely, what she felt instead was a chilling sort of clarity. The next evening, everything escalated. One of Jin-woo's lieutenants, a man named Min-jun, burst into the apartment, his face pale. He spoke rapidly to Jin-woo, holding out a phone. Jin-woo took it. His face hardened into a mask of pure, cold rage as he looked at the screen. Without a word, he walked over to Lena and showed it to her. It was a picture of the front door of her small apartment building. A place she hadn't seen in nearly a week, a place that felt like it belonged to another lifetime. A crude X was painted on her door in red. "Vasily knows," Jin-woo said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He knows who you are. He thinks you're my weakness." "Am I?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. His eyes bored into hers. "You are my liability. And I protect my liabilities." The distinction was clinical, but his gaze was not. It was fiercely possessive. "We're moving. Now." The escape was a blur of controlled chaos. They didn't take the elevators. They took a private service lift to a subterranean parking garage. A black, armored sedan was waiting, engine humming. Lena was bundled into the back, Jin-woo sliding in beside her, his body a solid wall of tense muscle. They sped out into the city streets, two other sedans flanking them. For a few minutes, it seemed they were clear. Then, from a side street, a heavy truck slammed into their lead car, sending it spinning into a shower of glass and metal. The world erupted into violence. Their driver swerved, tires screaming, as bullets pinged off the armored exterior of their car. Jin-woo moved in a flash, pushing Lena down onto the floor of the car, his body covering hers as the back window exploded inward. "Stay down," he roared over the chaos. The car lurched to a halt in a dark industrial alley. The fight was outside now, a symphony of gunshots and shouting. Lena, pinned beneath Jin-woo, could smell the cordite, the hot metal, and the sharp, familiar scent of his cologne. His weight was immense, solid, a human shield. One of their doors was wrenched open. A man with Vasily's face, wild-eyed and desperate, leaned in, a gun in his hand, aimed at Jin-woo's exposed back. There was no time to think. Lena reacted. Her hand fumbled on the floor, finding a heavy, metal tablet that had fallen from the seat pocket. With a surge of adrenaline, she swung it upward with all her strength, connecting hard with the man's wrist. He screamed, the gun clattering to the pavement. The surprise gave Jin-woo the opening he needed. He moved with a speed that was inhuman, a blur of motion that ended with Vasily on the ground, silenced. The alley fell quiet, the only sounds their own ragged breaths and the distant wail of sirens. Jin-woo turned back to her. His face was grim, his suit jacket torn, but his eyes were blazing. He reached for her, his hands checking her for injuries, his touch urgent, almost frantic. He scanned her arms, her face, his gaze lingering on a small cut on her cheek from the shattered glass. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice raw. "No," she whispered, her body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. "I'm okay." He leaned his forehead against hers, his eyes closing for a brief second. The control was gone. All that was left was a stark, terrifying relief. When I saw him, he breathed, his voice so low she could barely hear it. When I saw his gun pointed at you, I understood that nothing else matters. It wasn't a confession of love. It was something deeper, more dangerous. It was an admission of an absolute, unbreakable priority. A priority he had sworn he would never have again. Lena looked at him, at the man who was both her captor and her protector, the monster and the shield. I should be running from you, she confessed, her own voice trembling with a truth she could no longer deny. But I don't want to. That was the moment the line between them was erased forever. Not by a kiss, but by shared violence and a brutal, honest confession in a blood-soaked alley. They retreated to a new safe house, a sterile, anonymous apartment in a different part of the city. The failed ambush had changed everything. It had made her a target, and in doing so, had forged a bond between them in the crucible of violence. The pretense of her being a temporary liability was gone. She was part of his war now. As Jin-woo directed his men, his voice a low, lethal hum over the phone, piecing together the attack, Lena replayed it in her mind. Something was wrong. Vasily was desperate, but he wasn't stupid. The attack was too precise. Too perfect. They knew the route. They knew which car he would be in. It wasn't just Vasily, she said, cutting through the low murmur of his conversation. He lowered the phone, his full attention on her. What do you mean? Someone told him where we would be, she insisted. The truck that hit your lead car, it was waiting. It wasn't a chance encounter. It was an ambush set by someone who knew your protocol. He studied her, his expression unreadable. His men were loyal to a fault, bound by debt and fear. Betrayal was the ultimate sin in his world, almost unthinkable. Who? He asked, the single word laced with ice. I don't know, she admitted. But when we were getting in the car, I saw him in June. He wasn't looking at you. He was looking down the street. I thought he was just being watchful, but now it felt different. Like he was looking for a signal. Minhyun. His most trusted lieutenant. The man who had been with him for years. The man who saw her as a weakness. The seed of doubt, planted by her observation, took root in the cold calculus of his mind. He didn't dismiss her. He considered it. Her perspective was untainted by years of history and loyalty. She saw only what was there. We will find out, he said. He ended his call and made another. He was setting a trap and she was the bait. The plan was simple and terrifying. Jin-woo would let it be known that he was moving Lena again, this time out of the city. He would leak a false route, a different one from what Lena had suggested the traitor knew. But they would take the original route, the one from the first ambush, counting on the traitor's arrogance. Lena had to play her part. She had to look afraid. She didn't have to act. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it was a strange, hard resolve. She was no longer a waitress caught in the crossfire. She was a participant. She had made a choice in that alley, and she would see it through. As they prepared to leave, Jin-woo stopped in front of her. He adjusted the collar of her jacket, his fingers brushing her neck. His touch was light, but it sent a tremor through her. Stay behind me, no matter what happens, he commanded softly. I'm not a bystander anymore, Jin-woo, she replied, her voice quiet but firm. I'm in this with you. His dark eyes held hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something that looked like respect. He gave a single, sharp nod. The drive was agonizingly tense. The streets were dark, slick with rain. As they approached the same industrial district, Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. Just as she predicted, a black van swerved to block their path. Men poured out, armed and ready. But this time, Jin-woo was ready for them. His own cars materialized from the shadows, boxing the attackers in. The firefight was short and brutal. Jin-woo moved through it like a phantom, a symphony of controlled violence. In the chaos, Lena saw him. Minhyun. He wasn't fighting. He was standing near the back of the van, his gun raised, aiming not at Jin-woo's men, but directly at her. Jin-woo, she screamed. He turned, following her gaze. He saw the betrayal in his friend's eyes. He saw the gun pointed at the one thing he could not lose. He moved, faster than she thought possible, placing himself between her and the bullet. The shot rang out, loud and final in the night. Jin-woo grunted, stumbling back a step, a dark stain blossoming on his shoulder. The cost was paid. In blood. His blood. For her. The sight of him, wounded for her, broke something inside Lena. The last of her fear burned away, replaced by a cold, sharp fury. While Jin-woo's men subdued a shocked Min-jun, she ran to him. "I'm fine," he gritted out, though his face was pale with pain. "Liar," she said, tearing a strip from her own shirt to press against the wound. Back in the safety of the penthouse, the adrenaline faded, leaving only the quiet hum of the city and the smell of antiseptic. Lena cleaned and dressed as wound, her movements sure and practiced. The bullet had gone clean through his shoulder. He was lucky. He sat on the sofa, watching her, his usual mask of control stripped away by pain and exhaustion. The empire was secure, the traitor dealt with, the threat of Vasily eliminated. All that was left was the two of them in the quiet of the night. When she was finished, he caught her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. He pulled her closer until she was sitting beside him. "So-hyun was my past," he said, his voice low and raspy. "A ghost I couldn't save. A mistake I swore I would never repeat." He lifted his uninjured hand, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was achingly tender. You are not a mistake, Lena. You are my future. The only one I will not fail." He looked at her, his dark eyes stripped of all pretense, all defense. It was a raw, vulnerable plea. "Stay with me?" It wasn't a command. It was a question. The first real choice he had given her since the night she dropped that glass. Her old life was gone, burned away in alleys and gunfire. A new one, dangerous and uncertain, lay before her. Lena didn't need to say the words. Her answer was in the way she leaned into his touch, in the way she took the bloody cloth from his hand and set it aside. Her answer was in the quiet certainty that settled in her heart. This world was violent. This man was lethal. But in his dangerous orbit, for the first time in her life, she felt completely, terrifyingly safe. He was her captor, her protector, her king. And she was his queen. She would not be his weakness. She would be his strength. His hand covered hers, a silent, unbreakable promise in the heart of the glittering, merciless city.